It was me that was embarrassed.
Why does it seem tight?
Wait, did you send them out? You didn't send them out yet.
Thank you.
All right, I'll read them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I need this.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris.
How you doing, Chris?
Thanks, Chris.
Good.
Okay.
I don't need extra.
Trying to
Not a pig.
give us gifts.
Yeah. I
hoping
always
not
kept
to.
his gifts.
How you'll be on
I could have placed a little Sudoku or something.
I don't know. I feel like when I see that,
Let me know when you're ready, Sandy.
I feel like it might be a little more than prior years. Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Worry about the timer though. You know, like we're not gonna run out of time. Okay.
On behalf,
I gotta use this right here.
lose my reputation. On behalf of the Southington Board of Finance, I'd like to welcome everyone to this public hearing on the 2023-2024 budget. Today is Monday, March 6, 2023. That was more for the camera. In the audience, we have many elected officials I'd like to recognize, just so the public can be aware of who they are. I'll introduce you by group and just ask that you stand when introduced so folks can see who you are. Town Council members with us tonight. I'll do Board of Education, Planning and Zoning, and Town Clerk is an elected position. And I want to explain the process used to develop the budget and levy taxes. While we are one town, our budget's essentially developed in two parts. There's a Board of Education budget and a general government budget. At a high level, the elected Board of Education presents the educational programming or an operational budget to the Board of Finance. At the same time, the town manager presents the general government budget. Included in the budget are revenue items, predominantly state grants and local service fees, and then the expense items and the debt service. The expenses are much greater than the grant and fee revenue, so once the budget's approved, taxes are levied to make up the difference. The town maintains a grand list which includes all the residential and commercial property, vehicles, and business property. These assets are assigned a value based upon their market value. The amount of money needed to balance our budget is levied to the owners of property based on the value of the property they own. In the private sector, which is much like a family setting, your income and assets determine what your expenses can be. In the public government sector, the spending is determined first, and then the income required to meet that spending is determined second and levied on the taxpayers. When you are spending someone else's money on other people, it requires careful oversight. Without careful oversight, it's easy to both overspend and to overtax. The Board of Finance, your elected citizen volunteer board, exists to carefully review the budget and the financial health of the town in conjunction with the needs and desires of the town residents, businesses, considering the state and the overall economy and its impact on our citizens. In a careful oversight process, the Board of Finance will recommend a budget to the Town Council. Once the Town Council approves a budget, the Board of Finance will come back and simply set the mill rate. The complexities or risk factors that face us as we recommend this budget are very high inflation, along with measures to temper that inflation, such as increased interest rates. Uncertainty in our MERS, our Municipal Employee Retirement System or pension system, which is the defined benefit pension fund, and I believe that concern is on the growth of the assets in the fund. And we sought some clarity on that we're waiting for, because more recently we became aware that we had to ante up more money as a town into the state-run MERS system. We had budgeted it, and then subsequent to that, we determined that we owed even more. So we're finding out why. Could be a number of reasons, but we think it's the growth of the fund itself and not mortality tables and the population of employees in the fund. Our health insurance costs are another risk factor on two sides, the use of health insurance and the cost of it. So what we found was, and it's not a bad thing, it's a reality, that a lot of people are going back for elective procedures and they're going back also for surgeries, elective procedures and preventative health that they put off for a couple of years. So that's just a consideration that's driving some of our costs. And then and due to a significant spending increases, all this inflationary increase in the budget, we may have knowingly excluded some needs in our community. So, in seeing such a high budget, various managers along the way, department managers, they may have left stuff out that they needed because the budget had grown so fast so quickly because of inflation, and said this may not be a year to put them in. So we are seeing some signs, too, that there are some needs not even represented in the budget. As we introduce the 23-24 budget, keep in mind a few points. We remain a healthy community. We have significant reserves, what we call the rainy day fund, but we are not immune from the negative impacts of inflation and the rising interest rates. None of us are, as people, as businesses, or as a municipality. We did receive COVID relief funds. We continue to use the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, for identified and improved capital projects. This use of federal funds benefits the local taxpayers, because it's federal money being used on stuff we would have had to do anyway. The total budget request is for $175.6 million, which is $13 million more than the current year's budget of $162.7. The Board of Education is seeking an increase of $7.6 million, or 7.3% when you include the more recent MERS pension adjustment. And the general government budget, including the debt service, is seeking an increase of $5.3 million, or 9.1%. And they're going to explain the debt service shortly. The overall impact is 1.93 mil increase, and if you look at a different way, a 6.62% tax increase. What does that mean? This is where it comes down to all these millions come down to what it means for folks. The property, if your property is assessed at $200,000, assessments are generally 70% of market value. So if your property, be it your car, your house, your business, whatever it might be, is assessed at $200,000, appraised $285,000, you will see a tax increase of $350 for the year, going from $5,826 to $6,176. The mill rate moves up from 29.13 to 31.06. Included in this is the use of excess fund balance, the rainy day fund, for capital projects, $1.9 million. We actually have more in the rainy day fund than our policy calls for, so $1.9 million, we call it excess rainy day fund, will be used for capital projects. And the excess comes from spending that was withheld over prior years. How do we get excess? Well, we run surpluses, and the surpluses become undesignated fund balance. And this amount is very similar to the amount last year. Just know, for curiosity, the Board of Education budget includes educational programming, not the buildings and not teacher retirement. The buildings fall on the general government side of the budget, and they show up mostly in the capital improvement plan. They'll show up a lot in our debt and our debt service, because we're still carrying debt from this building and others. And teacher retirement is currently funded by the state. So those are the other two pieces of a full educational system. The town serves in the capacity of a landlord with the school buildings, but since we are one community, no rent is charged. As you may know, Southington has completely renovated many of its schools. We carry a significant amount of debt for those renovations. Schools and education are very important to Southington and comprise the majority of the budget. Currently, the Board of Finance is in the process of reviewing the budget to understand the revenue estimates and spending needs as expressed by the town manager and the Board of Education. The Board of Finance is collaborating with taxpayers to determine their priorities and thoughts regarding the budget. Every member of the Board of Finance is committed to collaborating with all stakeholders, assessing the economy, asking questions, seeking input, serving as a voice of reason, and ultimately making a fiscally responsible recommendation to the town council. You are here tonight to provide valuable input to us as we work towards finalizing our recommendations. We are committed to being a government that respects, works for, and is accountable to its citizens. Taxpayers can participate in the process by reviewing the budget, voicing opinions, watching the meetings and workshops in person or by streaming them on the web, collaborating with us as we move towards a final recommendation. All citizens should remember we strive to do what's in the best interest of the entire town of Southington, both the short term and the long term. As we work towards a budget, we must remain mindful that Southington's made up of over 43,000 people and many diverse businesses, each with different needs, different expectations, different financial situations, in different stages of life, impacted differently from the economy, possessing different views on the role of government, holding different opinions on the scope of education that should be provided to our youth, and our recommendation must take into account the economic diversity of our people. We must also assess the risks facing our community. On an ongoing basis, this board asks a lot of questions and collaborates with many people, strives for responsible spending, seeks to eliminate waste, drive transparency, encourages management to set a vision and to prioritize, and ultimately seek the most cost-effective manner in which to finance government operations. This is what we do. Can we now stand for a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now hear from any other Board of Finance member wishing to address this audience. Okay, I'll now call upon our town manager, Mr. Mark Schoda, to present his remarks regarding general government and the debt service portions of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank my department heads, most of which are in the room to my left. Back in December, I gave them instructions that I knew, we all knew, that debt service was going to be a very, very difficult proposition this year. So I asked them to be very, very conservative with their budgets. I told them point blank I wasn't going to look at any new employees unless it was absolutely necessary. They all followed through, and they came in with very conservative budgets. That being said, this is my sixth budget to the town. This is by far the most difficult budget I ever had to put together. Mr. Chairman, you already commented on some of the things that we had issues with this year. One of which was obviously the health insurance we didn't know about back in December, and MERS we didn't know about until last week. So those are things that were kind of surprises for us. The big one we understood was debt service, and we all knew that was going to come our way. So that's one of the three biggies we knew was coming our way, and that's why I asked for a very conservative budget. My budget is split into three different ways. Number one is the operating budget, as you mentioned. Number two is my capital budget. And number three, our finance director, Mr. Bowes, is going to explain our debt service budget. So let's talk about the operational budget first. And I don't want to say exactly what you said, Mr. Chairman, but first of all, I'm asking for $2,402,703 more. That does not include the $605,000, which is going to be a part of our public hearing on Thursday. So that doesn't include with that. As I mentioned, there's absolutely no new employees and no major new programs in my budget. The big increases, if you look at the $2.4 million, wage increases, $684,000, health insurance, $734,000, MERS pension, $670,000. That does not include the $605 that we're talking about on Thursday, and then gasoline and diesel. We were lucky enough over the last 3 years to be locked into gas and diesel for very low numbers. That expires in June, so therefore we had to incorporate all the new numbers into this one. So that's $193,779. So if you look at those numbers, that's $2.2 million. Take the 2.4, you subtract the 2.2 for those 5 generators I just gave you, it leaves a delta of $120,000. Now, even if you add the 605 on there, the delta doesn't change because that gets added to the MERS. The delta is still $120,000. So it may not look it, but this is a very conservative budget that's being affected by its time. The second part is the capital budget. I tried to be also conservative with the capital budget. We do 3 different aspects of the capital budget. The first one is budget reallocation. That's money that's currently in this fiscal year's budget. That's fiscal year 22-23. The money we have extra is used to fund certain items in my capital budget. This year I'm asking for $1,477,919, which is $2,500 less than last year. Fund balance money, Mr. Chairman, you already mentioned that. This is money that we have in our fund balance. We have a very, very healthy fund balance. This is capital that can be used for fund balance. Remember, only certain capital can be used for fund balance. You don't want to use it for things that are not necessarily defined as capital because it will hurt us with the bond ratings, and we don't want to do that. I'm asking for $1,878,400, which is $82,690 more than last year. And then finally, the only thing that affects this budget and the mill rate is cash. And that we use every year. I need it for road widening and improvements. Last year, I asked for $500,000. This year, based upon the budget, I could not ask for that much. I'm asking for $300,000, which is $200,000 less. So the only item that truly affects this budget from a capital standpoint, I'm asking for $200,000 less than last year. Be happy to any questions that the staff, my staff is here to answer any questions. I'm here to answer any questions. And Mr. Bowes will talk about debt service. Jim?
While he's getting ready, I just want to make a point. A lot of people in the room must be saying, well, if the town has such significant reserves in the rainy day fund, why can't those be used to offset? I can answer it too. But why can't those be used in such a challenging year, an inflation and interest rate, a challenging year to people across the board? Why not use those funds? And the answer is that we could only use them for an emergency, which this is not. We could only use them for a one-time opportunity, which this is not. And we could only use them to pay down debt, which we're not going to do because our debt is working effectively. So we can't. It's circling the drain when you reach into your savings or your rainy day fund for operations, and the rating agencies would pick up on that, and it would hurt us in the long run. So it's good that we're in that position, and we can't really use that position to offset our impending issues at the moment. So, putting that out there. Mr. Bowes, debt service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My boss has asked me to do this in 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk really, really fast.
You want me to time you?
That's very, I'm getting fined for but don't start the clock yet. So I'm going to go real fast, and if there's any questions, please give me a yell. Debt service portion of our budget is the section of the budget where we repay municipal bonds and the interest on those bonds that we have used to capitalize big-ticket capital items, investments, such as the school that we're standing in right now, and future issues such as the library and open space purchases, et cetera, et cetera. Standing here tonight, principal and interest, in total, the town of Southington is indebted for over $105 million. That goes, general government side is $28.6 million, schools $43.9 million, and sewer, the plant, $32.5 million. And I'm rounding. Plus, in the budget that you have before you, fiscal 23-24, is an estimate of what we're going to be repaying next fiscal year, not only on the bonds that we already have on the books, so to speak, but also the bonds that we'll be issuing either later this month or very early in April, as soon as we're right in the middle of that doing now. We're doing a bond sale now, working with our financial advisors and our underwriters. Right now, as I stand here, I anticipate selling $17 million worth of bonds across many different types of projects, some of which approximately half the library project, approximately half the school building project, the school roof project that's going on, and others. I mention these because these are visible ones that all of us drive by and are quite familiar with. When that bond issue is done and sold, it is estimated, I'm estimating at least, that there's going to be a little bit over $136 million in indebtedness. That's what we're going to be in. Next fiscal year, the 23-24 budget, that's before you folks, that'll be before the council, and it's before my fellow residents and citizens, is going to require $13.3 million in principal and interest repayments. I have it broken down, but I'm just going to stick to totals if that's all right. I can answer questions if you'd like. The current year, 22-23 budget is a little over $11 million in debt service. So that adds up to about a $2.3 million increase in next year's budget. Now, a question is, well, why are you going to bond so much that's going to cause such at least a principal repayment, a large amount next fiscal year? By various federal and state laws, municipalities have to basically match the cash outflows of projects that have been authorized to be bonded within a certain time frame prior to and after the project. And if you don't, you end up with a legal problem that you don't want, including the potential taxability of the interest on those municipal bonds. And people, whether they're individuals, mutual fund managers, pension fund managers, who buy most of the muni bonds today, are after the tax exemptability of the interest on municipal bonds. So we don't want to go there. So I have scraped actually a few million off of that. Originally, we were talking about my predecessor borrowing something like 21 million. I've been able to move maybe 3 or 4 million out, hopefully to calendar 2024, and we'll be talking about that again, hopefully, God willing, same time next year, right here. That increase of $2.3 million that's paid, needs to be paid next fiscal year represents a little bit more than, almost 21% of an increase for the debt service. And I've tried to work the numbers the best I can. It's the largest debt increase that I've ever seen in one fiscal year in 32 years of doing this. And believe me when I tell you, I've tried. We're also still looking at refunding. The town has saved millions of dollars in interest over the last two refundings, 2021 and 2019. You might remember interest rates were quite low, similar to refinancing your house or remortgaging your house. Lower interest rates, you save a bundle, hopefully. The town, my predecessor did a great job, along with Mr. Shota and Lou Perillo and the other folks who were involved with some of those rating agency presentations to keep our strong bond rating and really saved us a lot of money. I don't see an opportunity right now because, as the world knows, rates went up, and there's nothing we could do about that other than just keep an eye out, and if a refunding opportunity comes, you'll be hearing from me again. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to, unless there's questions, I'm going to be here all night, and I think I made another 5 minutes.
Oh, boy, 5 minutes exact.
There you go. So that's all right. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I get to keep, I'm still on probation, too.
Okay, now I'd like to call upon Mrs. Colleen Clark, our Board of Education Chair, and our Superintendent, Mr. Stephen Medancy, to speak about the Board of Education budget.
Good evening, Chairman Leary, members of the Board of Finance. We've already presented our budget to you, so I'm not going to go over it again, but so that everyone knows, this year reminds me of a former Board of Finance member by the name of Phil Pomposi. Some of you may remember him. In Phil's words, it's a bad year. This is the first time I could agree with him. This has been a very difficult year for us because the budget that you have from the Board of Ed has no new staffing, no new projects, no new programs. We are trying to keep everything status quo, and yet we're still coming in at 7.27, which is extraordinary in my estimation. The increase in the health insurance, the increases in salaries for our contractual obligations, our increases in transportation, our increases in the municipal employees' retirement, which we just found out about last week. The increases in our utilities, our reduction in Title I, these things have contributed to this. And so, yes, in the words of Phil Pomposi, it's a tough year. So with that, we are open to questions. I know we have our workshop tomorrow night. The superintendent, staff will be there. I'll be there, members of the Board of Education, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have at that time. And if you have any questions now,
Thank you.
thank you.
Nothing to add. Okay, well, the purpose of this public hearing isn't really to hear from me or the others, it's really to hear from the folks. So we're going to ask all Southington taxpayers to be invited to address the Board of Finance. To allow fairness, we're going to ask that each person be given 3 minutes to address the board. We ask that each speaker speak from the podium just so we can capture your voice because we are video recording and we want the audience to be able to hear. And I ask the audience always to remain respectful as opinions are shared. And just a reminder that emergency exits are located over here and over here and in the back, should we have to use them. It's just always important to point out safety. If anybody would like water, we have a couple available if somebody's in need. There are restrooms located out through the double doors. Now it's time to listen to the taxpayers who are our most important voice in any town. So, who would like to speak first?
Hi, my name is Kristen Keska. I live at 149 Wonk Spring Road, and I have lived in town for 12 years. First, I appreciate the board members who responded to my written testimony last week. It means a lot to me that you would reach out to someone who fervently supports both proposed budgets in their full requested amount. Also, your responses were very candid and detailed. You're doing a good job with a hard task. But I need to express that some emailed feedback is still missing my point and sometimes is doublespeak. A board member responded to my written testimony and bravely acknowledged that, quote, during these years we have cut the proposed Board of Education budget, as you have shown here. However, that it has never resulted in reducing or eliminating staff, programs, or major projects or special equipment, unquote. But it has. When this board reduces what the Board of Education requests, the difference has been made up by cutting, for example, in the past, middle school sports. While it has returned, last year the Southington school system had 1,092 staff positions. It had to be reduced by 11 to accommodate the cuts made last year's fiscal budget requested by the Board of Education. The Board of Ed also reduced positions in the past decade, often by retirements and resignations. But they either do not add them back or have to use federal funds to add a new position. While the town has focused on rebuilding the new middle schools, the other 9 schools have not been, quote, completely renovated, as was mentioned in the introduction today. They've had projects in the works that have been left out of the Board of Ed budget this year because it was assumed they'd be paid for by non-lapsing funds. I was at the February 15th Board of Finance meeting when Superintendent Mandancy made clear that he removed replacing the floors at Hatton Cafeteria, repairing the stairs at the high school, purchasing a new liftgate vehicle for the maintenance department, in order to keep his budget, his original budget, enough to maintain the current programming and staff level. But he expected to use non-lapsing funds. If the Board of Finance approves the February 15th tabled request from the Board of Education to use non-lapsing funds, these projects will not happen. In de facto, they are cuts. Also, I appreciate that the district received millions in COVID relief from the federal government. It is only because of these funds that our district finally was able to get the highly praised one-to-one devices for all Southington Public School students. I have been at this public hearing for years and argued years ago that we were significantly behind the times because comparatively to other districts, we did not fund and refused to fund one-to-one district devices. It took a global pandemic to finally catch up to be comparable to other schools. I suggest both that the town and finance boards pass the education and town budgets without any reduction. Quote, our grand list growth is $3.5 million more this year in tax revenues, and this is excellent. But the town council just rejected the town's administration proposal to do a property tax audit on businesses. I will ask them why at their public hearing, but as you mentioned, we are one town. While I know my own property taxes have gone up minutely, I am grateful for that slightly, over the last 12 years, it is not because the mill rate has been increased, but the reassessed value twice at least on my home. If fairness is to all Southington, then the town council should not be rejecting a business property audit. Finally, a board member messaged me comparing public schools of Wallingford to Southington. True, we almost have the same size population, 43,000, but Southington has 1,000 more students. According to the U.S. Census of 2021, they had the average median income of $88,000, and we were over 104. They spent $10 million more higher than education in Southington with 1,000 less students. Our median household income suggests that Southington businesses and citizens should be paying more for educational services. I have been doing politics at the state level too, and that message is coming from state politicians working in education that Southington needs to contribute more. As a member said, money does not the only measure of success. One example of how our schools are doing is the latest state accountability dashboard, and it gave Southington a grade of 75.6, and then was compared to Wallingford again at 68.9. That's not a town I want to be compared to. I'd rather be Farmington at 80.6, Glastonbury at 81.2, but they're not in our DIRG. Out of our 24 DIRG town levels, 16 received a higher score than Southington. So I formed this part of the email as a form of gaslighting. I wish we all could fund all the new programs and staff that the administration requested, but we know that's going to be over 12%, and it's virtually impossible. I wish we could have a 7.27, but that's where we are at, and that's why I wish this board and then the town council fully funds not only the town schools budget, but the full town budget next year. And as you said, Mr. Leahy, we are one town, so I fully support the budgets in the best interest of our entire citizens in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, if anybody agrees with that and doesn't want to, speak just to repeat it and simply wants to stand so we could see, we can take that to save anybody from coming up, but everybody's welcome to come up. Okay.
So I guess that means he's asking if you want to stand to support what I just said. You can still speak, however.
This is in support. Hold on, just stay put. Thank you. I allowed a little leeway on the first one, but if we have a lot of speakers, I got to hold to the 3-minute mark. So, next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Bob Brown, 587 Burrett Street in Blantsville, longtime resident. I raised our family in this fine town, and I was a longtime teacher in town. I taught 41 years in Southington in this caring community, and I love teaching here. It's a great place to teach. I also served on a Board of Education for 3 terms. I'm here to talk about the elephant in the room, the subject I believe we can all agree about, but few want to talk about, the topic that should be our only concern, but isn't. Some will talk about the impact of inflation on all school systems, all businesses, and all families. It is quite challenging for everybody. We face that too. Others will talk to you about numbers and tax cuts and politics and even re-elections. I want to talk to you about what we all care deeply about, our children, our students. I say our because they are the responsibility of all of us in order to create a thriving, productive democracy. When I talk with teachers, administrators, parents, and students, and employers, I am struck by one glaring reality. More students now are traumatized, struggling, socially and emotionally challenged than ever before. If test scores are your thing, then look at them and be prepared to be shocked. If difficult behaviors, declining attendance, cries for help are your concern, be prepared for a shock. What caused this? I'm not here to debate that, but I will say the isolation of the pandemic, political divisions, perhaps social media, the rise of hate and acrimony in our society, and untreated mental illness have all contributed. And traumatized students have more trouble learning math and science than those who aren't. So realizing this, we should be looking for how we can help. We should be looking for more time for adults to counsel and meet with struggling students, more social workers, school psychologists, and guidance counselors to individually and expertly address student needs. Instead, we are looking at how to cut, how to even keep what we have, ways to cut corners and eliminate things we need, but not as much as others. We are politicizing the future of our children, and by doing so, the future of our society, our wonderful community, future taxpayers, our economic success, and ability to progress. What is the answer? You already see a maintenance budget that represents a significant cut from what was actually asked for in front of you. I would propose a couple of ways forward. First, do not cut anymore. Schools are not a business that can raise prices. We don't charge the students or their families. We cannot cut staff and ask more of fewer personnel. Our education personnel are already stretched so thin and more and more are leaving for careers that are paying more and stressing less. And we cannot close down. So in addition to not cutting anymore, we need to educate the public. Parents and educators already get this. Look at the audience. It's more than you had here 5 years ago. But those without children in schools who also pay taxes need to be led to understanding that our future is inextricably tied into the future of those we are now educating. That is a tough task, this decision, especially because millions of advertising dollars are not available. It takes courage sometimes to do the right thing in the face of criticism, but this is the right thing to do for our shared students and our community's future. The price of not doing it will be even higher in the future. Let me just add at the end, I am now one of those retired senior citizens on an extremely challenged, if you know my personal story right now, fixed income. I no longer have kids in the school system, but I would willingly pay whatever tax increase, and it's going to take a tax increase to do this whole budget. It takes to better educate our children and to help all of us for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have anybody else who'd like to speak tonight?
Good evening, Katie Wade, 39 Madeline Lane. Southington schools operate on a lean budget, and they do an amazing job with what they have. You've been presented with a level service budget, so any cuts to that request will be felt. I've heard the argument that the fault for our fiscal shortfall lies in Washington or Hartford, and I'm sure there's points to debate there. But the data we've seen has shown comparable Connecticut towns put thousands more per student into their budget in comparison to Southington. And they're operating under the same state and federal government. So, you know, as I tell my kids, you might not like the rules, but if everyone's playing by them, you're not the victim. Local officials have asked for more data on more towns. Okay. But what school districts should we be compared to? I know nothing is apples to apples, but if our peer schools aren't Wallingford, Cheshire, Berlin, would it be Meriden or Waterbury? The cost of things goes up. Nobody likes it. But we're already in a position where the vice chairman of the Board of Education, Mr. Bachevsky, told us at the January 12th meeting in relation to the budget that staffing is more important than safety, which, you know, whoa. But if we're already in the position where we're not sure we can keep our kids safe and adequately staff the schools, what should the Board of Ed cut? Good schools are what you have in good towns. I love Southington, and I think most of us in this room love Southington Public Schools. We should try to keep them. And not just for those of us with school-age children. I want to live in a town that values providing homeowners with a long-term return on our investments. Cutting our schools' level of service makes them less competitive, less able to meet the needs of its students, and having lower-performing schools negatively impacts the value of our homes. Mr. Morrison, at election time, I saw your signs. You told us that you support students and educators. Hope to find out that's true. You invest in things you have pride in. So I'm asking you to have pride in Southington and to invest in Southington's future. I know this is a tough year. Best of luck with your decisions, and thank you for your attention.
Any other speakers?
Good evening. My name is Lisa Hammersley. I've been a resident in the town for 12 years, and I'm here to provide comment on the Board of Education's proposed budget for fiscal year 2024. I ask that the Board of Finance, at a minimum, recommends the full Board of Education recommended appropriation of $111.8 million. My son William is in 4th grade at Hahn Elementary. His educational experience was interrupted in 1st grade. Even now, years later, I see that there are fundamentals and lack of comprehension years later. Immediately after the COVID pandemic, our school had more staff assigned to it, more than one teacher in some classrooms, and additional interventionalists. All of those are gone. Our kids are still impacted from the pandemic and require more to get them past the disruption. The impact of the pandemic is not over for our kids, and I, as a parent, am asking for the town to prioritize the most important thing in my life, which is my son. Budgets are moral documents that reflect the values of its constituencies. I choose to live in this town to provide my son with the best educational experience that he can have. Maintaining status quo and only funding fixed cost increases is stating that we, as a community is okay and comfortable with being adequate or doing the bare minimum. I am not okay with this position and ask that our town make new investments in education to allow all of our children to collectively strive for excellence. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Elise Krantz. I live at 44 Bridle Path Drive. I'm a parent of elementary and middle school students here in town. I'm also an educational advisor for Bright Horizons. I'm here today to express support for the current proposed budget that has been endorsed by the Board of Education and Superintendent Medancy. A lot of my neighbors have already shared with you ways they have been personally impacted by recent budget cuts, but I would like to share with you some relevant research and statistics to best express how important I feel it is for the Town Board of Finance to accept the proposed budget as is. First, it's not a surprise to anyone in the room, teachers and parents especially, that we are still recovering from the educational and social impacts of the pandemic. Studies have shown that students are further behind than ever before. According to an analysis published in January of this year in the science journal Nature Human Behavior, students experienced average learning deficits equal to about 1/3 of a school year as a result of the pandemic. And children still have not recovered the learning that they lost. The Connecticut Department of Education reported last year that the percent of 9th grade students on track to graduate was the lowest in 7 years. Now is not the time to reduce our investment, but to give the school as much financial support as we can in order for it not to fall further behind. To combat this, schools should be investing more time and money hiring additional educators, purchasing new classroom technology, and increasing support for special needs students. A second key point I would like the Board of Finance to consider is that Southington, a popular town that attracts many families with school-aged children, spends less per pupil, according to the Connecticut Department of Education, than many of our peers, as it was mentioned. We spend less than Wallingford, Cheshire, Berlin, Cromwell, Newington, Wethersfield, and a host of other towns. Southington Public Schools, as you may know, has the 12th lowest per pupil spending in the entire state of Connecticut. Southington Public Schools also spends 15% less than the state average per student. Superintendent Medancy deemed it prudent to address these needs. He prepared a thoroughly researched budget that would have added 37 new full-time educators, completed major projects, and updated school equipment. But despite recognizing the value these additions would contribute to our town, the Board of Education felt that such a large increase in the budget would be a challenge for the town taxpayers to support. So they made the very difficult decision to cut. The proposed budget you have before you maintains the same level of resources as we had last year. It is essentially flat funding. The Board of Ed has already done the job of ensuring our schools can function at the most economically and fiscally responsibly level possible. We cannot go any lower. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Have any other speakers? Mr. Moise, what we got?
Hi, my name is Kathy Riley. I live at 58 Doral Lane. I'm here today, as I have been in the past, to ask you to please raise the mill rate in this town and fund our education budget. Not just fund it on the bare minimum of salaries and health care, but fund education like you actually care about it. I realize that a portion of our Board of Education budget was cut before it even came to your table, which was super thoughtful of them. However, I ask that you actually review what they cut. In addition to many other things, they cut money for security. Security should not be negotiable in our schools. Every single person who has been in a school, or even school adjacent, can tell you that school safety is a #1 priority for most educators and most parents. However, in our town, by our elected officials, the money is cut. Why? So that each family can save $20 to $30 a year. There are serious issues with security in our older school buildings, and they need to be addressed. Our school teachers go through arduous active shooter training with the Southington Police Department. They learn ways to combat people with guns to protect their students. Think about that for a minute. They have to protect their students. Then we show them support as a town by cutting the funding. The Board of Education, part of them, cut the funding for a vestibule that was proposed to be put in the main entrance at Southington High School. This vestibule could provide protection to an entire school body. Instead, we cut it. In November, I'm sure that you will run on the campaign that you support education, right? All while allowing access to an entire school building to anyone who walks in the front door. Since most of you have probably never set foot in Southington High School, let me explain. When you walk in the doors of Southington High School, you walk into a hallway that provides access to both floors of a school building. There are no locks on any of the doors once you enter the main building. A vestibule could contain someone once they enter the building from the outside. It would provide a step of security to keep the students and the staff safe from anyone coming in from outside the building. I realize that you didn't cut the vestibule. In fact, I realize that the Board of Education has the ability to decide what to do with the money once you decide on a number. However, they can't even think about building a vestibule or hiring support staff or running important life-changing programs if you don't give them the money to consider it. Approving the budget that was set forward to you is fine, but you need to actually go back to the original request from Mr. Bedancy, because it's what's best for our students, our staff, and our town's safety. If you really truly cared about the latter, you would approve more than what he's asking for. This fiscal cliff is here. It's no longer coming. We cannot wait any longer to provide the necessary and long-needed funding to our schools. Many of you like to tout that you do and have supported education. As I said, I'm certain you will run on this fact in November. You'll walk with your pro-education signs in the Apple Harvest Parade, and you'll post your pro-education claims on Facebook. However, I have lived in this town as a taxpayer for the last 9 years. I've attended this budget meeting many times, and for that entire time, this board has been reserving money in a rainy day fund and slicing Board of Ed budgets to an alarming degree. It has to stop. You make decisions from afar. You don't visit our schools. Go to the schools, speak to the security guards, listen to the administration, learn about the jobs and the programs that you hold the purse strings to. You have kept underfunding education and has caught up to us. I just hope that each and every day it isn't my child's education or worse, their life, that has to pay for your lack of attention to a dire need.
Thank you.
Good evening. John Moyes, 238 Stonegate Road, Southington, Connecticut. So here we are again, another difficult financial year. However, this year's difficulties could have and should have been minimized. A little history lesson is in order here. Going back to May 11, 2020, when the Town Council approved the budget, overriding this board's recommendation in lowering taxes to negative 0.01 mils. The warning was clear then. With COVID, they are starting a fiscal cliff as the council started to kick the financial can down the road. Again, May 9th, 2021, this board made their budget recommendation that was overridden by the town council, this time decreasing the Board of Ed budget by $1 million, more than the recommendation of this Board of Finance of $400,000. The council and Board of Finance were warned of the fiscal cliff that became steeper in 2021. Why? Because the town council told the Board of Education to use the federal funds for operational expenses that were for mental health and to bring students up to speed due to COVID. It was stated over and over again, the fiscal cliff will be difficult to overcome if you all continue to go down this path. On May 9th, 2022, this board decided for the first time to only decrease funding for the Board of Ed and not the town budget. That was another $500,000 to add to the fiscal cliff approved in a coordinated effort with the council and the Board of Ed Republicans. Again, the warning came from the minority. These boards and their concerns were not taken into consideration. This brings us to 2023, as Southington begins tumbling off the fiscal cliff. Amnesia sets in on the last 3 years, and a revisionist way of reviewing history, as I have listened and read comments blaming the state and federal government. The fact is, the state and federal government did assist during COVID, and the funding was to be used for 2 to 3 year planning and one-time expenditures. Most towns followed the rules. Some, like Southington, were reckless and did not. Southington misused the funding for operational expenses, which gets us to the point of us falling off this fiscal cliff. Other so-called unforeseen expenses, such as the MERS increase, could have easily been absorbed for those 80 towns who have MERS that follow the rules. On social media, I see our elected officials blaming everyone else, when all they have to do is look in the mirror to see who to blame for the fiscal cliff Southington is in. I would like to ask this board to hold a public hearing to add to the budget the police officer that was removed from the budget. This has been done in the past and can be done as well. Again, you all talk about public safety and the crime issues in Southington. The police department needs our assistance. This is the time to add to the force and try to minimize the crime. With everything that has happened this year in our neighboring towns and across the state and the country, it is hard to believe the police officer would be cut from this budget. You managed to put together a public hearing for the MERS increase, so I know you know how to do this. As for the Board of Education, there was a special Board of Education meeting to move money around once again in a non-lapsing fund. There is no video to review it as it was not filmed. This was to be for the one-time expenditures, not for operational expenditures. This removed several safety issues from our school and the climate our country faces with mass shootings in schools. 1 minute. Safety and education are hand in hand. I would ask you to vote no on the BOE plan on non-lapsing. That only adds to the fiscal cliff created in 2020. This money should be used for one-time expenditures. So yes, this is another difficult year. Your job is to balance the needs of all taxpayers. I do have a word of caution for each of you. With the pending school construction and the new library, please do not try and remove the funds from the reserves, as this will end up costing more in the interest and possibly downgrade our credit rating. I am very glad to hear this board and the town manager speak to this earlier, to not touch those funds other than the ones the town manager is recommending. In that, I wish you all good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers tonight?
I want to enter the minutes from the council for the last 3 years into the record. You'll have them.
Okay, you give them to the manager.
Good evening. I'm Mark LaJoy, 372 Kensington Road. I thank you for putting this on. You guys have a challenging job ahead of you, and we appreciate what you're doing. I'd just like to comment a couple of things. One, for a point of information, my understanding is that $3.2 million of the Board of Ed budget is mandates that are mandated by the state of Connecticut that we have to pay. Is that correct?
I can't say exactly. There are mandates in the budget.
So these are mandates that we're forced to pay for, whether it's busing or whatever it is, that we're forced to pay for. It has nothing to do with the way we run the schools. There's another so that puts us to a 3.2 increase, if you include the mandates. The second issue is 85% of that budget, if I'm not mistaken, is salaries and benefits. And I'm not convinced that throwing more money is the answer. I mean, I'm all for education. I raised 2 kids in this town. But it's got to be conservative, well thought out, and well planned education. Wasting and not overseeing it, and I'm not saying that's happening. I know we're working hard on these budgets, but I think you guys need to double down and really review what's going on, because I'm not convinced throwing more money and more people is the answer. And 85% of $110 million is a hell of a number. In addition to that, with the fiscal cliff, there is a fiscal cliff, but it's in Washington. That's where it started, and it's in Hartford, Connecticut. We're being pushed by bad policies that the people of Southington have to deal with. The highest inflation in 40 years, the highest fuel prices in history in the last couple of years. The grocery stores, everything is going up. Our taxpayers are being slammed from every direction. So I believe in good, strong education. I think it's a necessity, but it has to be conservative, it has to be well thought out and well planned. Because there is a cliff, and it's being pushed on us by the people in Washington and Hartford. And we need to continue to be conservative. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other speakers tonight?
Good evening, I'm Zay O'Shanna. I live at 21 Alpine Trail. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I never heard of something called conservative education before. The budget that was presented is to educate our students the best that we can for their future, the future of our town and our country. Saying that, and I just took a couple of notes, 85% of the budget, salary and benefits. Yeah, we have to pay our teachers, and we provide them benefits, and I'm pretty proud of the teachers that we have in our district, pretty proud of the administrators we have in our district, and I look at what they've done to our students. My 2 kids went through this school system. They're not there now, but they were. And I'm pretty proud of what they've been able to accomplish in their life and others and their friends and others that have gone through. I'm a product of this school district also, and I'm pretty proud of that as well. To say that $3.2 million in mandates from the state is causing this problem. The state provides a lot of mandates. A lot of unfunded mandates. Very unacceptable. I know that the board has talked about that many times. $3.2 million in mandates aren't what's throwing this budget out of whack this year. It's the fact that it is a level service budget. Level service, I mean, those mandates were there last year. There's mandates, there's new ones that come every year, but those mandates were there. They're not causing us this problem this year. And saying throwing more money at the problem is not the answer. I don't think this budget is throwing more money at the problem. This budget is a level services budget trying to maintain what we're able to offer our kids, offer our students. And the last thing I'll say is safety. I don't know, I think you know where I stand on the safety issues that came in front of our budget. To cut safety at the potential expense of our students and our teachers is completely unacceptable. So I like one other speaker, I would prefer going back and looking at the original budget that was proposed by the administration. I know you have a very difficult job ahead of you this year, as does the town council, but so does the Board of Education in terms of providing the education for our students. Let's not make them suffer. Let's not have these students who have suffered enough through the pandemic, the lack of learning and the loss of learning and the trying to make that stuff up. Mr. Brown mentioned the issues associated with social and emotional issues that our students are going through. It's not gone. It's there, and it's getting worse, and it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we could provide them with the services that they need within the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it for tonight? We do have, it is a public hearing. The purpose was just to hear from the public, not debate or contest the public in any way. But if there are any questions, I know Mr. Shota brought his team, his department leaders, and I know there's folks here from the Board of Ed as well. If anybody has just a true question about things, we could entertain a few questions, or we could wrap it up. Either we could answer them, Mr. Medancy, Mrs. Clark, or Mr. Shota and his team of all the managers of the different departments. Have our fire, police, every department's here. If anybody has a question. You could ask it now, or I could just ask that we end it now and ask them if they'd be so kind as to just hang around for 10 minutes from one-on-one. I don't want to open this up into a whole nother point, but they're here, they're dedicating their time. They could be here another 10 minutes if somebody wants a private conversation. It's okay.
Yeah, I actually did have a couple of questions. So I watched, or I was at the meeting, one of the Board of Finance meetings, and we're in a gap of $1.2 million already for next fiscal year. Is that true? 535,000 from ARP ESSER is being used
I
for
don't,
salaries and
not sure of what that, let's just put it this way, this year's paid for, we're good,
Yeah.
we're going into next year.
Like using the non-lapsing funds.
Okay, the non-lapsing funds, just a short note on that. What a non-lapsing fund is the Board of Education, over the last 2 years or so, by state law, could carry forward 2% of what we give them. Years ago, it was a use it or lose it. What they would do is very strategically spend it all, because they did not want to turn over a surplus. So they would pretty much spend down to a point. The state law changed, allowing them to carry over 2 years of surplus. It's called non-lapsing, interesting word, but what it is a surplus. They didn't spend it, they carry it over, and then they come back to the Board of Finance and say, may I have it back? When we do that, prior thinking was, yeah, we'll give it back to you for capital. So we gave it to you for operations, you didn't spend it all, but we will give it back to you. We always give it back. We'll give it back for capital. Now we're thinking, we gave it to you for operations, we can give it back for operations, because that's what we gave it to you for in the first place. You didn't use it for that by design, by strategy, by law, and they turn a surplus. So we do have a surplus. Right now, last meeting, we gave back 500 and some odd thousand back to the Board of Ed, and they're going to use it. And I believe there's 760,000 left of Board of Ed surplus. That's unspent money from prior years, not from this year, from the year that closed on 6/30/22.
So are you looking to zero that out?
No, we're
That
looking to give it back.
Give it back
And go back to education.
for operational expenses?
For operations, I think.
So-
I mean, there's 6 of us here. We have to, talk it through and work on it, but I would think that we're definitely going back to the Board of Ed. Doesn't go anywhere else.
Indirectly, use it or lose it. They're not allowed to keep that to pay
Well, what would they,
for-
I mean, they spend, they're a spending organization, they don't really have savings.
So where will that non-lapsing money get restored?
The Board of Ed would decide what to do with it. So we would
next-
give it, like, for example, we gave back, what was the number, Jennifer, 500 and something couple weeks ago? 490? All right, we gave back 490 from a prior year surplus. The Board of Ed takes it back. They do with it what they will.
So do you anticipate there being a surplus next year that they can put in a
I
non-lapsing?
do not know if they will run a surplus. I can't foreshadow that. So much changes in the Board of Ed, mostly in the special ed side. It's hard to predict. If they could predict it, they'd be, it's very difficult to predict. But we know what happened, what is true. They did turn over a surplus in last fiscal year, and we have it. We're sitting on 760,000 roughly right now of Board of Ed surplus, unspent funds from prior years. We have it now in our hands. It will find its way back to Board of Ed.
But not for the special projects?
It will, it could.
Well,
It
they're
could-
going to use it for operational expenses,
Yeah,
right? So not the special projects as intended, when no other department in town has to do that.
well, we give it, we can talk more about it, but we give it back to Board of Ed. Under law, the Board of Education, we as the fiscal authority can't control what they do with it. We don't control the line, we control every line item on the town side. We do not control the line items on the Board of Ed side. So if we give it back to the Board of Ed, they have their own finance committee within the Board of Ed that could decide what they want to do with it. Yeah, we as a fiscal authority, we control the town, every department in town, every line item in those departments, that's us.
I don't see
But-
where another department in town is required to look at that and use those kinds of funds for operational expenses. I think it's only the Board of Education.
Yeah, well, the Board of Education ran a surplus, meaning we gave them a certain amount of money, they used less.
But they're allowed to do that.
They can do that. They could use a surplus, and then what we do is we give them back their surplus, and they could use it again in the next year. I think I don't want to keep going, but I mean,
Yeah, just quickly, in essence, if the town, actually everything except education, has a surplus, that gets swept into the rainy day fund, which Mr. Shoda talked about. And you can only use that for certain things, but which is major capital projects, which is really what we use it for. For the schools, education, by state law, a surplus is allowed to be put into what's called a non-lapsing account, which is theirs, okay? It belongs to the schools. Now, what's happened this year is the Board of Ed asked us to take out $760,000, what was left in that account, and use it for operational expenses, which they're fully allowed to do because it's taxpayer money and it's by the regulations that are set up by essentially the state of Connecticut. In the last 3 years, they've rolled over $2.3 million of unused money, surplus money, and it's used for certain things that the school desires to do, including projects that you mentioned, which will be considered as part of the operational
We're
budget.
now in a hole going into next year.
I'm sorry?
They're not in a hole. They're asking.
There's a gap.
The school. Maybe I opened this up too wide here. The school is asking for a particular budget. And that's all that's happening now. There's not a hole. They're just saying next year we need $7 million more than we have this year. That's where we are, and we have to look at that. It's not a hole. It's a request for the new year. Things have gone up. Expenses have gone up. They've given us their budget, and like I said, specifically, the Board of Ed budget is up, whatever I said here, 7.6 million or 7.3%. They're saying to us, next year we need 7.6 million more than you gave us this year. That's where we are. And that's what's on our plate. I can't, I could always answer the questions, but just want to keep them quick questions here.
The request was to put it into their regular expenses instead of capital expenses. And we have not yet voted on this. Okay. It was tabled at the last meeting. It will be brought up again at the next meeting and voted on probably at that time.
Right,
yes.
That was,
and it's,
I was there
the question is whether we'll put it into their budget for next year for their regular budget expenses or leave it as it exists currently for capital expenses.
So it'll go to town council first before...
No, it will go back to Board of Education. Just what they do with it and where it ends up in the Board of Education is up to them. So that it will go back to Board of Ed. It doesn't disappear. It will go back to them.
All right, thank you.
One way or the other.
One way or the other.
Thank you.
If there's any other simple questions, we'll handle them. If not, I'll just ask. Any questions, good, but some take time. Katie? Yeah, please, because nobody could hear, except me.
For a member of the Board of Education. So I don't have the budget in front of me. We're asking for like a $7 million increase?
Rounded,
Okay.
yeah.
And so like every percentage point is $1 million-ish if we knock off, if the town council doesn't fully fund, if you fund it 6%, really, right. What are we losing with every million? Like, I know you can't answer that fully, but what's on the table?
They never answer it directly. It's hard because they have to go back and recalibrate the whole thing.
And I get that, but you're asking the taxpayers to be okay with cuts from our school.
Right.
So I think we have a right to know like what's on the table.
Monday night, we'll have a workshop with them. That's a public workshop. We all get around the table. So not Monday night, Tuesday night, tomorrow night. You're welcome to come at 7 o'clock, Town Hall. The Board of Ed comes and we just ask any questions we have. 6:30, I'm sorry, 6:30. We start a little early. 6:30, tomorrow night, Town Council. The Board of Ed will be there. But everybody should remember, in a way, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but this has been the process going on forever. So if somebody said 10 years ago, boy, we have excellent schools, this same process occurred 10 years before that. If somebody said 5 years ago, boy, our schools are doing pretty good, this is the process that was used. So the overall process hasn't changed. So I just want to let everybody know that. People could have different views on how much should go into spending. Are we lower than other schools? A lot of factors, but this is our process, and it has been the process we've used in town for decades. So.
In the last 10 years, how many times have you cut from a level service budget? I know last year.
The budget has always increased.
No, I understand
it's at what
the
rate
cost
it's increased.
I understand that like the amount of money going in increases, but how many times have you cut from a level service request?
a lot of the budgets brought forth to us were considered to be level service budgets. And a lot of budgets brought forth to us, I think all but one, have received a reduction to the request.
Okay.
1 year, there was no reduction to the request in the last 10, 11 years.
What have we lost in those years? If it's a
But-
level service.
I don't want to have a big free-for-all, but
No, I saw what you, I just, because you said the Board of
Yeah.
Ed members were here, so.
yeah, they can answer, but yes, that's just how, every department, every principal in the schools, they get all the requests from every teacher and program. They look at it and say, boy, this is huge. They trim it back, then they give it to the superintendent and say, this is our request from Hatton School. The superintendent looks and says, boy, when I put it all together, everything sounds good, but when I put it all together, it's a big budget. He trims it back, and then it goes to the Board of Ed. They look at it and say, oh, and they adjust it. Then it comes to Board of Finance. You know, it goes through a series of evaluations for urgency, importance, priority.
Right, but those are the ones, but that's not the level, I know
Yeah.
I'm getting in the weeds, but that's
Yeah.
not the level service, that's the additional.
Sometimes,
right?
sometimes it's level services.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if there's any simple questions, we'll have the town, everybody will just hang around for 2 or 3 minutes after if you want to catch anybody. Mr. Schott, anything? Anybody could walk up to him, ask a question. Our police department, fire, all our town staff, and Board of Ed is here for your questions. All right, thank you all. We won't do that again.
No, that's good. That's fine. It's painful for you, but it's a good benefit, you know? It didn't. It's painful for him because he's got to come up
They
with
can
the
go
answer, right?
talk, or, because Jose is answering your question. See?
I thought I didn't set the spreadsheet up yet for this year.
Yeah, we got to set the spreadsheet up, because it already moved today. And I tried to put the 840 in, then I had to increase it 2% for uncollectible tax.
Yeah, but normally it's not that much. It's 12 million, so.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if we say we cut $1 million, we want to see, like, what the mill rate is, because
And the
obviously.
MERS goes up more than the 840. The MERS goes up because it's 2% uncollectible.
Oh.
You got to add the 2% uncollectible to it.
Good job, John.
Thanks. We'll see you tomorrow.
That kills me.